Most players need dozens of hours of gameplay before they can even attempt this boss, and I defeated it in just 11 hours. And I am going to show you exactly how. Power is an insanely fun game, but let's be honest, progression in this game feels painfully slow. Online, you'll see people saying it takes about 100 hours to defeat the challenges on the default settings, and they typically would not be wrong. Palworld is designed to be time-gated, as every obstacle can be beaten, but only after investing a massive amount of time, grinding resources that are brutal to farm early. And so, I wanted to test something. What if you played Palworld smart, but not longer? In this video, I am displaying an all-in-one early progression guide for new and experienced players to progress quickly on the base settings in Palworld. Using this strategy, you could end up fighting legendary pals by day 22 or 11 in real life hours, and I will be walking you through every step so that you could replicate it too. The beginning of the run is, in my opinion, the most important section of the game, as it allows you to build a strong foundation and shave off around 20 to 30 minutes from the early game. We are going to be heading to this location next to the desolate church waypoint for our first base location. In the meantime, we will be opening these 4 chests located in the Plateau of Beginnings and the grassy Behemoth Hills, as they have a chance to spawn Grade 1 and Grade 3 chests, giving us spheres and gold coins. A quick tip for all players is to utilize the sliding mechanic whenever you can, especially in the early stages of the game where your stamina is limited. This allows you to maintain your character's velocity while regenerating your stamina. In this gameplay, you will be watching me constantly rotate my point of view very often, as I am constantly scanning for pal spheres on the ground, as well as the specific pals we needed for our starting base. Close to the grassy Behemoth Hill waypoint, we encountered one of our first desired pals, the Eikthydeer. Fortunately, it had the lowest possible level for its spawn, which was level 9, giving us a guaranteed 15% capture rate with the back bonus. You can also forego this step if you weren't fortunate enough to capture it on the first try, but it does help shave off around 20 to 30 minutes of the game if you do. As we head towards the base location, we want to prioritize capturing 4 Vixies, 2 Rush Balls, 2 Eikthydeers, and 1 Kremis before building our first base. While heading to the base location, be sure to scan this section of the map before building your base to capture the desired pals if you want the optimal base setup. However, I will also be showing you in this run that even if you didn't manage to obtain the optimal setup, you would still be able to progress fairly quickly. Although I encountered a second Eikthydeer, it would have taken me some time to even attempt to capture it since it ran away, so I just skipped it instead. I accidentally killed the first Vixie that I came across and only captured 1 Rush Ball and 1 Eikthydeer by the time I built my base. I also captured 2 Fwags as it was convenient, and I also had the additional Pal Spheres to do so. I was also fortunate enough to encounter enough Vixies before building my first base. Now that we have arrived at our base locations, I will be breaking down my strategy for our first base. I will be placing all of my skill points into work speed to minimize the time taken for building structures in my base, as handiwork early on is significantly worse on the base piles than other work suitabilities such as lumbering and mining. I used Eikthydeer for lumbering level 2, and Rush Ball for mining level 1, providing me the resources I needed for my first few levels. I then placed my focus towards completing the structures needed for the initial base levels and picking up the resources I needed, which were gathered by my base spells. In this playthrough, you can see that I am able to gather the resources I needed passively through my base spells without having to gather them myself. I also ensured to place my flux into the base slots so that I could complete multiple structures simultaneously, making use of each power slot as much as possible. Another tip for the video is that you can actually demolish structures that were previously built for the base levels to obtain their materials back. This is possible as there isn't any diminishing returns behind dismantling, and most structures aren't actually necessary for the base. Fiber is also a major bottleneck in this section of the game, as wood and stone were easily collected while running towards the base area. For example, I could demolish the beds and pile beds for their fiber. Eventually, this allowed me to complete base level 4 even before my Eikthydeer managed to gather 30 fiber that we needed for the wrench. Once we had the fiber, we began building the wrench as a base event occurred, distracting my pals for a short period. Unfortunately, this was a major setback as we would have preferred for the event to be a wandering merchant instead, who could provide us with Palworld fragments. Since we didn't have a wandering merchant, I placed 4 Vixies into the wrench to begin producing Palspheres. In my experience, 3 Vixies sometimes felt inadequate, especially if you didn't have any good RNG in your captures. So, 4 Vixies producing Palspheres would be ideal. I proceeded to build the berry plantation using the resources gathered by my base pals, giving me base level 5. And since for base level 6, we now needed the Palgear workbench and statue of power, which needed both wool and Paldium fragments. I then replaced one of the Vixies with Kremis to begin gathering wool, and I made my way towards the Rain Syndicate Tower waypoint, collecting the Paldium ores along the way. After arriving at the waypoint, I spotted a Foxparks nearby along with a Palsphere and immediately made my way to capture it. It is always important to have a fire pal present in your party. Leave a comment down below what do you think the reason is for this, as the answer will be revealed later in the video. Teleporting back to the base, I was only able to obtain enough wool to produce 3 pieces of cloth. And while waiting for 2 more pieces of wool, I began to craft the Palgear workbench and statue of power, ensuring that I used the frog in my party to continue the construction simultaneously. Once the Kremis dropped 2 pieces of wool, I swapped it out with a Vixie to continue producing Palspheres. Since I had more resources available than I needed at this point, I proceeded to craft a cloth armor which would keep me warm during the night cycle, a stone spear and common shield for combat, achieving player level 7. Since I wasn't able to craft the structures I needed for base level 7, I teleported back to the tower waypoint and began making my way towards the Fort Ruin waypoint, capturing pals along the way. Luckily, we encountered 2 Caprities, one male and one female, which we were going to need down the line. We then needed to wait for the night cycle as we wanted to capture Tombats for their level 2 mining, allowing us to gather metal ores from the nodes present in our base. Since I had some time before the night cycle, I teleported back to my base and demolished the berry plantation and statue of power, giving me the resources I needed to place down the crusher, lumbering site, and stone pit for base level 7. Once it was night time, I headed towards the 4th ruined waypoint and spent the rest of the night cycle capturing tombats, eventually capturing 3 tombats and dying to the 4th. At the end of day 1, I was player level 9 and was able to achieve base level 7. Moving forward, I will be constantly capturing pals in my vicinity to gather as much experience as possible, but for the sake of the video, I will only be pointing out key pals that are important for our progression. I made my way towards the Island Hopper waypoint, capturing a Nitewing, Croajiro, and other pals in the vicinity. I then encountered a crazy man asking me for a thwak to give, and he rewarded me with 1,500 gold coins. Using the Island Hopper waypoint, I returned to my base to build the structures for base level 8, but realized I was lacking the fire organs needed as I hadn't captured enough fire pals. So I headed towards the small settlement waypoint as there was a wandering merchant there who sold flame organs for 100 gold each. Using my newly obtained flame organs, I crafted the primitive furnace and used my foxparks to begin smelting iron ores. Since I had an excess of wood, I replaced my rush balls and Eikthydeers for tombats to begin gathering as much metal ore as possible. Additionally, since smelting was a time-gated process, I decided to head to the next waypoint, the Bridge of the Twin Knights waypoint. Encountering a pack of dire howls along the way, somehow feeding on another dire howl. This section of the playthrough is a perfect representation of Palworld's gameplay. Since most structures and items required metal ingots moving forward, but metal ingots could only be smelted by pals, it was essentially a bottleneck that required time to complete. At this point, it was important for us to be attempting to clear other bottlenecks simultaneously to ensure that we did not end up wasting time gathering resources that was not a limiting factor. Returning to my base, I did not have enough metal ingots yet to complete base level 8, so I opted to craft an Eikthydeer saddle instead, allowing me to travel more quickly. Next, I made my way towards the ravine checkpoint and captured a vanworm, allowing me to place the foxparks back into my party. I then made my way towards the sealed realm of the Swordmaster waypoint to capture the nearby Mozzarinas and Surfent before heading towards the small settlement waypoint. Our next objective was to capture the Incineram summoned by the Rain Syndicate Thug in the nearby forest. After capturing the nearby pals and the Incineram, I achieved level 16 with base level 8 at the end of day 2. On my way back to the small settlement waypoint, I rescued a caged Arsox, providing us with a base pal with level 2 Kindling, which was higher than the vanworm, and purchased eggs, milk, wheat seeds, and wheat from the wandering merchant in the village. I then teleported back to my base and achieved base level 9, and this was when I realized that I lacked the ice organs necessary for the cooler box, as I hadn't captured enough Pengullets earlier on. I then teleported back to the grassy behemoth hills, eventually capturing several Pengullets, providing us with the ice organs we needed for the cooler box. I then returned to my base and completed my base level quest and achieving base level 11 directly, and since I was level 18, I began transitioning my base towards phase 2 of the run. By building a second ranch and replacing the piles in my base for Caprity with level 2 planting, Surfent with level 2 watering, Tombat with level 2 gathering, and Arsox for level 2 kindling, as well as Mozzarina and chickpeas for the ranch to produce milk and eggs. I then headed towards the bridge waypoint and headed north in search of Cinnamorphs. Since they were relatively higher leveled, it was important to have a fire pile to make it easier for us to capture them without dying. Additionally, they provided us with honey, which allows us to go into phase 2 of the strategy. In phase 2, we will be focusing on the core gameplay loop for Palworld, breeding. Although breeding allows us to obtain perfect pals with perfect talents, traits, etc., I will only be focusing on the basics in this video, which is obtaining good base pals with good traits. Throughout phase 1, we inched past each level requirement with the minimum amount of crafting materials required. However, this material requirement was going to increase exponentially throughout the game, which made it important for us to obtain high quality base pals as soon as possible. So, in phase 2, we wanted to obtain our base pals with ideal traits. By utilizing the breeding farm, we could place a male and a female pal to have some alone time, creating a new pal for us in every 5 minutes in the form of an egg. This process, however, required cake, which had a 20-minute cooking process. This meant that, typically, preparing the cake would take a longer time period than the breeding process. However, something you might have missed is that I have been placing every skill point in my character to work speed. With 1000 work speed, this allowed me to prepare a cake within 2 minutes instead of 20 minutes instead, 10 times the original speed. This meant that my bottleneck in this phase was going to be my breeding time rather than my cake production. Additionally, I had almost every pile I needed to passively generate the materials for creating cake except for one, which was honey. Earlier on, I had to defeat or capture Cinnamorphs to obtain the honey for my first cake. However, this is also where breeding comes into the equation. Again, breeding allows me to create a new pal from 2 parent pals. By breeding Pengullet and Croajiro, I could breed a Beegarde which produced honey when placed in the ranch. This meant that now I had everything I needed to prepare cakes, so long as I could obtain the materials and prepare the cake every 5 minutes. Next, I needed to ensure that I had the pals I needed to breed my endgame desired base pals. And while I will be explaining the breeding combinations as the video continues, you can also refer to the description down below for the breeding chains that I use for this kind of challenges. But Keon, what about traits? Right now, I have the means of obtaining the pals, but rainbow traits were also difficult to come by. Fortunately, Palworld had a fishing mechanic, allowing us to have easy access to rainbow traits by simply searching for a fish spawn with green sparkles. So, for us to obtain our ideal base pal, we needed to find the random pal through fishing with the remarkable craftsmanship trait, providing a boost to work speed, and breed that pal to pass down its rainbow trait, eventually passing it down to our base pals. But why is remarkable craftsmanship so important? It provides a 70% boost to work speed, allowing one Pal to almost perform the work of two Pals instead. And later on, with other easily obtainable traits, it could also allow a Pal to perform the work of three Pals instead. As I mentioned previously, material requirements were going to be exponentially more difficult, which meant that we needed as much work speed as possible to obtain the materials we needed. I have also attempted this strategy without the trait, and found that I would constantly encounter road bumps where I wasn't generating enough resources at different points in the game. And so, to summarize what is going to happen in this phase, I will produce the cake I required for breeding, and any excess time I would have in between the breeding processes, I would dedicate to fishing to try and obtain the rainbow trait that I wanted. Additionally, breeding would not occur during the night, so I dedicated the night cycles towards obtaining pals that I would need for the breeding chain. To recap, on day 3, I began breeding Beegarde by placing Pengullet and Croajiro into the breeding farm, and using the extra time I had before the breeding process, I defeated 2 more Cinnamorphs to obtain the honey I needed to prepare a second cake. On the night cycle for day 3, I captured the Lady of the Lake, Azurobe, as she provided level 3 watering and was also needed for the breeding chain. Next, I crafted a fishing rod and some simple bait and attempted to swim towards my next location, the Sunlit Isle. However, I forgot to craft a Surfent saddle and instead opted to respawn at my base, craft the saddle, and teleported towards the Fort Ruin waypoint to capture Chillet and obtain the ancient technology point I needed for the egg incubator. I then collected my belongings before making my way to the Sunlit Isle. With this, I then repeated the loop of preparing a cake, breeding a pal, and fishing for rainbow traits. While unnecessary, you could also breed a Ghangler for level 2 watering and Sootseer for level 3 Kindling. However, they can also be skipped if you were lucky enough to obtain remarkable craftsmanship from fishing early on. Fast forward to day 5, I captured a Pengullet with remarkable craftsmanship after obtaining 12 other rainbow traits. In the meantime, I had captured a Mossanda on day 4 and a Kingpaca on day 6. On day 6, I headed to the sealed realm of the Thunder Dragon waypoint to try and capture Relaxsaurus. Luckily for us, I encountered a nest of Relaxsaurus and instead teleported away, causing the Relaxsaurus to despawn and leaving the eggs in the nest. Just a tip for you, as this allows you to obtain the desired pals without wasting any pal spheres. And so, with this, I had the pals necessary for my breeding chain. To summarize my strategy, my breeding chain revolves around breeding Grizzbolt to obtain my base pals. So, I bred Pengullet with Surfent to obtain a Loupmoon. Using Loupmoon and Ghangler, I managed to breed a Rayhound with remarkable craftsmanship. And using the Rayhound with Mossanda, I could obtain a Grizzbolt with remarkable craftsmanship. So, to quickly summarize, using Grizzbolt with Kingpaca gives us a Braloha with level 4 gathering and level 4 planting. Grizzbolt with Caprity to give us Anubis with level 4 handiwork. Grizzbolt with Relaxsaurus gives us Orserk with level 4 electricity. Grizzbolt with Orserk to give us Astegon with level 4 mining. Grizzbolt with Bronze Cherry or Anubis with Cinemoth gives us Ghangler with level 4 Watering and level 4 Gathering. Grizzbolt with Nitewing gives us Jormuntide, Azurobe and Eikthydeer, which is usually bred before I actually obtain my Grizzbolt, gives us Blazehowl. Using this Blazehowl with Jormuntide, it gives us a Jormuntide Ignis with level 4 Kindling. Additionally, you can also breed Grizzbolt with Tansy to give us Splatterina for level 4 Handling, but also with level 3 Medicine Production. With this setup, you have the basic makings of an endgame base, providing you with enough resource generation until endgame. Congratulations! You have basically achieved endgame in Palworld. Now that we have our desired base pals, they are actually the easy part of achieving endgame in Palworld. Without going into too much detail, leveling is pretty much the major bottleneck behind every run in Palworld, as player level significantly impacts every aspect of the game. So, how do we raise our player levels quickly and efficiently? Well, as much as I hate to burst your bubble, until level 44, capturing 12 of each pal for the capture EXP bonus is the optimum method, as there are enough low level pals that can be easily captured at this point in the game. In this run, I captured pals from level 1 to level 30 in these regions, with the most expensive spheres being used being the Gigasphere. Additionally, in this phase, I will also recommend to build your endgame base in either of these two locations. Although in this run I built my base in the Sunlit Isle, I would actually recommend this location instead, as it also had 3 oil nodes with 2 kinship peach spawns in the vicinity, allowing your pals to gather them early, which will be good for endgame. Additionally, you can also make use of the various mining sites available in the Technology 3, which is also gated by player level, as well as defeating various tower bosses. However, if you have stuck to this strategy thus far, it should not be too difficult for you to defeat the tower bosses. At level 19, you are actually able to place 2 power boxes, aka build 2 different bases. Your first power box will be in our initial base location. However, you will then place your second at your intended final base location. And while breeding your base pals, after obtaining the Remarkable Craftsmanship trait, you should have spent the remaining time placing your pal box at your intended base location so that you can place 4 Vixies into a ranch to begin farming Palsphere. You could also head towards the volcanic region to Fisherman's Point to obtain tomato and lettuce seeds, as this allows you to place down tomato and lettuce plantations and also prepare salads as your main base food of choice, providing a boost to work speed. Also, by defeating Zoe and her Grizzbolt, which is a boss at level 10, it will give you access to the iron mining site, and with Astegons, you could easily obtain the stone and metal ingots required to craft Gigaspheres. FYI, if you do not have the Wandering Merchant available, you can utilize the Crusher to turn stones into Plaudium fragments, which allows you to craft the Gigaspheres. And so, for this run, I basically spent days 5 to 21, aside from breeding, capturing pals around the map, and eventually achieving level 44. Once we have achieved level 44, this is where the gameplay differs quite a bit. Once you have achieved level 44, progression typically becomes painfully slow, as most wild pals left available are higher leveled and requires better spheres to capture easily, which results in a large resource consumption. If you require a large amount of crafting materials, this will end up causing another bottleneck in terms of resources. And so, we will want a different source of experience instead. However, there was actually a cheap source of experience that we could utilize, which was defeating Predator Pals. You see, capturing pals at higher levels require better spheres and thus more resources. And at level 44, we had access to the Legendary Sphere, which was the cheapest sphere capable of capturing level 60 pals. Just like its name, using the Legendary Sphere allowed us to capture the Legendary pals. However, this was going to be difficult as all of the Legendary pals had over 10,000 HP each, and our pals would only be dealing single digits worth of damage, making each fight last over 15 minutes. However, there was a way to make this fight a lot easier. By using a fire pal, you could deal a percentage of their HP through the burning status effect. However, even that had its limits, as they would only occur an average of 3 times throughout a single fight. Nowhere near enough to capture them easily. And so, in my strategy, we will be opting to capture the level 60 Celestia present on Feybrick Island instead, as a substitute for the Legendary Pals. I will not be explaining my rationale behind this, but comment down below if you would like the explanation for this, and maybe I will make a comprehensive video explaining my entire strategy. Moving on, I captured various alpha bosses located throughout the map like Jormuntide, Blazehowl, Anubis, and Azurobe, and used them to battle Celestia, eventually capturing it. And so, with this level 60 Celestia, by day 21, I attempted to battle Frostallion and accidentally killed it instead of capturing it, as it somehow caught a burning status effect while being at low HP from my Blazehowl. But Keon, you still hadn't explained how am I supposed to obtain my experience easily? I'm getting to that. You see, this run was originally going to be titled Defeating all of the raids in Palworld in 50 in-game days. However, I had recorded this run in November 2025 and was on a holiday trip for December. And in 1st of January, I realized that the PowerPod strategy that I have been using wasn't viable anymore. So I couldn't really release that video, and thus I decided to showcase my strategy instead. So at this point, instead of trying to capture the Legendary Pals over and over, I realized that I had the capabilities of defeating level 60 Pals and decided to begin cycling through the level 60 Predator Pals present on Feybrick. The Predator Pals in question were Bushy Noct, Incineram Noct, and Hellzephyr Lux during the day cycle, and Sootseer during the night cycle. Since they were Predator Pals, you didn't have to capture them and could simply just defeat them, and each of them provided about 1 million experience points without requiring any spheres. This meant that you could obtain triple the amount of experience gained from capturing a Legendary Pal with 3 times the return but virtually 0 material cost. The only difficulty in this strategy would be to defeat the Predator Pal, and admittedly this is somewhat of a skill issue. You had to ensure that you did not die during the battle. However, you could also make it easier by placing a Pal box whenever you begin the battle. This would allow you to respawn during the battle if you were to die accidentally. And so, using this strategy, I actually achieved level 65 around day 50. After achieving level 65, that is when you have access to every structure and every resource available in the game. This is the point of the game where you can slow down and begin preparing for endgame content such as raids, expeditions, and arena, which would require a large amount of time. As mentioned previously, you could also be preparing for endgame content such as raids while leveling, but the point of this video is to demonstrate what is the most efficient way, in my opinion, to reach endgame. Thanks for watching this video. Like and subscribe if you found it informative. Depending on the response to this video, I might release a more comprehensive guide about the different mechanics in Palworld, particularly to the player's level and why it is so important to Palworld's gameplay. See ya!